Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. Today, we're going to be talking about the coaching search right off the bat, just to kind of get updated on where we're at with that search. We're recording Saturday, and so there's not a lot of new information, but we'll talk about that, get that out of the way. And then the bulk of the show is going to be looking at the roster. We're going to do a roster evaluation on players that are under contract in 2024 and beyond. And then we'll talk about some of our own free agents and whether or not they've got a role to play if we want to re-sign them. I know that John Schneider's mentioned in his press conference, Keith, that he wanted to kind of keep the continuity, thought that the roster was ready to win or close to it, and he wanted to be able to give the new head coaching regime essentially a ready-made roster that needed a few tweaks that was going to be able to be competitive right away. And in order to do that, we've got about 20 unrestricted and restricted free agents to look at. Which ones come back, which ones don't. How do you reboot this thing? I know they don't want to completely do a redo on the roster. So we'll have that conversation as well. How you doing, man?
Doing good. So, so we got the, let's just start with the coaching stuff, because I've seen that there have been 6 interviews completed as of right now. There's 3, maybe 4 to go, because there's been some talk of Lincoln Riley, which of course we won't get. The NFL circles aren't necessarily picking up on that, because there's no asking other teams for permission or that kind of stuff. I was informed this morning by Mr. Bill Alvstad that apparently that first round is supposed to be done by the end of tomorrow, so at the end of the weekend.
And that's a lot of coaches to go through.
It is, but it's not about, well, some of it's about finding your coach, but some of it's also about using this process as an excuse for John Schneider to talk to some of the best football minds out there about what it takes to win, how they would build a roster, what they find most important, just to give him some perspective on things besides the Pete Carroll way of doing things.
Sure.
And so that's really kind of what we're looking at this point. That's why he's casting such a wide net. We'll learn more about who's going to actually be the coach when Sunday evening is here and we find out, okay, who's being invited for the second round of interviews, because that's when he's going to decide who's coach.
If we do, right? It's like it's been radio silence. You'd mentioned 6 interviews done. There's not been a single drop of information out of those interviews, which is the John Schneider way. I mean, that's just the way it's been. It's been always pretty tight in this organization. And, but it's interesting because, Dan Quinn and like Mike Vrabel, those guys are not, you can kind of peel those guys away right away. Dan Quinn's out of the playoffs. He's able to kind of interview in person. And so is Vrabel. I would think if they wanted those guys, to me, they would be kind of quick to kind of bring those guys in, show the confidence that they were always going to be the guys and, be on our way.
I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that, because he's got this opportunity to talk to all these people. So why not? And it's better, like if you're like the Dan Quinn, especially if he goes, hey, look, I interviewed 10 coaches and Dan's the one who blew me away. That sells Dan Quinn. This isn't a rehash of Pete Carroll. This is excitement for Dan Quinn. And I think that actually makes it better for Vrabel and Quinn.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you definitely want to go through the process. And I think John Schneider is smart to do so, for sure, for all the arguments you just mentioned. I think that the more time that goes by for me, the more time that goes by gives me the thought process that John Schneider's going to get more comfortable trying to take a big swing. Now, if you take a big swing on somebody, and I'm talking like Ben Johnson, Lions offensive coordinator, or Bobby Slowick, Houston Texans offensive coordinator, or the defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald.
Yep.
Now, yeah, if you're going to take a big, what I mean by big swing is these guys have no head coaching experience, but they're totally coveted up and coming minds in the NFL. These guys are going to land a head coaching job somewhere, maybe with Seattle, maybe with another club, but they're probably going to get that opportunity this year. And if you take that big swing, if you're John Schneider, you could be out of a job in like 2 years if this thing does not work. And it's been shown over and over again that in the NFL, about 1 out of 5 or 6 of these coaches will end up being successful that we're talking about, and the others will fall by the wayside. Teams will implode, and it'll be a long journey back to the top. And so we have to, do due diligence for sure. I would take a swing if I was John at a guy like Ben Johnson. I think that would be my first choice, to be completely honest. The more I've thought about this, the more I'm thinking, if you put Dan Quinn in there, fine. It seems like it's going to be safe. I think the culture, the integrity of that coach, what he brings to the table as a known quantity, is comforting in a sense. But I don't know if that's the right decision in the end. And I keep having this debate over and over in my own head, and I keep coming back to the young coach marrying up with John Schneider as his new tandem thing. Now, when you go with Dan Quinn and John Schneider, they seem to be kind of more parallel, more even as far as respect level and so forth. I think a younger coach would kind of fall under John's wing a little bit more, be okay with John making a lot of personnel decisions, be okay making all the player acquisition decisions and draft final say and all that kind of stuff. With Dan, there might be some push-pull there. So.
Yeah, I mean, the longer this goes for me, like the more I think it's not going to be the what you can consider a big swing. Unless it's Lincoln Riley. To me, that's a big swing. But the other guys, like, he wants to pick these guys' minds, but that doesn't mean he wants to put them, give them the keys to the car. And when
I disagree with that.
I know you do, but but I just look at all this. When he was doing his interview and somebody or his press conference, and somebody asked him what's the thing, he said the first thing, the most important thing, is maintaining the integrity of the culture of our franchise. That's the most important thing to him. All these younger guys, you know nothing about that.
Well, I think,
they're
and you and I disagree with this little point that that John mentioned in the press conference, and you sent me a text about it, and I saw your point, and I disagree slightly in his intent when he said that. I think that for me, the way I took it was that I thought he was dropping a little bit of an Easter egg there on this search, in that if we do go with a young offensive-minded coach, that we have the systems in place, we have the culture in place already, and since I'm going to be in charge, that thing's not going anywhere. We're gonna maintain the win now, always compete kind of mantras, and it's going to be there no matter who we choose. And if it's a young guy, we can support that guy with all of that. He doesn't necessarily need to, he doesn't have any head coaching experience. We're going to help him. we're going to bring in a defensive coordinator that's strong, that's, maybe it's an assistant head coach title with that sort of a thing. And we'll go through this together as a culture building exercise, and we'll show you the way. And you thought it was completely different.
Because he didn't talk about like any of that. What he said is, we want to maintain the culture. And that was the word that to me stuck out, is this is going to be he's going to bring in someone who is going to maintain the culture, that he's confident isn't going to break it apart.
I just don't know that he would have all these interviews with Frank Smith and Ejiro Evero and Bobby Slowick and Patrick Graham and Ben Johnson and Mike Kafka and etc. just to bounce ideas around as an exercise. Like, that's pretty transparent if that were the case. And, a lot of these coaches wouldn't even give him the time, I don't think, to do that. I think this is a serious search, and these are serious candidates. And he mentioned also the competition with other teams to get these guys. And that's where I'm thinking he's talking about a younger guy, specifically a guy like Ben Johnson.
No, see, when he said that, I specifically thought Dan Quinn, because Quinn is, other than Ben Johnson, Quinn is the prize out there. He's the experienced head coach who got to a Super Bowl, got fired because his GM was an idiot, and all he did was go to Dallas and build a incredible defense really quickly.
See, I started out in that camp. I started out in seeing this in that way, in this search. And I've evolved over time to really start to think that some of these younger coordinator guys are actually really in the mix for this job.
I think they're in the mix. I just don't think they end up winning the job. I think in the end, it's going to come down to how much control is he willing to hand to a guy like Dan Quinn, who's going to ask for more control than a guy like Ben Johnson. And how much he trusts a guy like Ben Johnson, who's never done it, never seen it, he's 2 years as an offensive coordinator. That's it. So he's only had 2 years at management level. Granted, they're both under Dan Campbell, but Dan Campbell's a unique guy. He's like Pete Carroll. You know what I mean? Like there's only one Dan Campbell out there. And when guys are trying to reproduce someone else, and that someone else is such a unique person, it never works. Look at every single Bill Belichick assistant that has ever gotten hired away from him. They've all failed because they've all tried to reproduce what Bill Belichick does, and they can't because they're not him. And it just comes down to, like, I think it's going to come down to multiple things, and I think in the end, he knows if he brings in Dan Quinn, they'll win. If they bring in Ben Johnson, they might win, or he might be Jim Mora. You don't know. And
yeah, you do know. I think you do know. I think you know more now in today's NFL than you did when Jim Mora was coming along.
I don't.
Yeah,
NFL locker rooms aren't any different just because the reporting's better.
Yeah. Well, you can look at Ben Johnson as a highly educated, very smart guy who's well thought of around league circles and particularly the coaches he's worked for. I don't remember hearing those things about Mora, but
not when he came to Seattle, because he'd already been a head coach in Atlanta. But when he was getting hired into that position, the Atlanta one, oh yeah, all those things were said. Like
it's interesting.
He was the prize that offseason.
I think the wild card here for me is Mike Vrabel, honestly, as kind of a Dan equivalent to me as Dan Quinn. Now Dan Quinn's got a little bit larger resume, but Mike Vrabel kind of has the same sort of presence on the team, and they may decide to go that way too. Yeah, I see your arguments on experience and all of that. I just think that John Snyder has an opportunity here, and if he can grab one of these really young guys to compete in the NFC West against arguably two of the best coaches in the NFL, he may take that opportunity, because you're in one of two camps, I think, when you're doing this search: a defensive guy or an offensive minded guy. And do you go toe to toe and play for the shootout with an offensive minded coach, or do you try to get a guy that can stop those offenses, like Mike McDonald? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what the answer is. With our existing roster, I would say we have a ready-made offensive roster that would be very attractive to an offensive-minded coach. Our defense is a hot mess, though.
I am not in either of those camps. I am in the camp of knowing that the skill set required to be a successful head coach is different than the skill set required to be a good coordinator.
Absolutely.
And that's the reason why so many of the coordinator, so many like coordinator level guys that get promoted fail.
Absolutely.
Is because they are a great mind. They can drop X's and O's. They can teach the coaches how to run, the scheme and the game plan and all of that. But they can't manage the people. They don't have can't run the locker room. They can't hold
it's a big job.
The loyalty of 60 guys. Because there's it's the roster plus, right? That's what you need. That is what the successful head coach is. It would be cool if they also bring with them some fancy scheme and innovative whatever, because then you're bringing that into your franchise and you're like, yeah, now we're going to have that. But that's not going to make you, whether you win or not, as a head coach. It's a different skill set of what you need. That's what I agree.
And that's what we don't know about Ben Johnson. We don't know that about Slowick or Mike McDonald. We just don't.
You're right. We don't. That's the thing. We don't.
And that's the big swing, is what I'm talking about. It's like, do you take a big swing on a coach like that? If somebody else might be willing to,
if this team was be the next
Sean McVay,
4-13, and your roster is nowhere close to winning, I think you are more likely to take that swing.
Yes, you are, but they're more likely to fail for that same reason. And if you have a roster that's like Seattle's, you could take a big swing on a guy like Ben Johnson and set him up to be successful very early in the process, as opposed to trying to rally a 4-win team around to a winning culture. That's a way more heavier lift, I think.
I don't know what you're describing as far as taking what you thought was a ready-made roster and putting in an inexperienced guy. Just throws Nathaniel Hackett at me, because that's what they did, and that was an absolute disaster.
Yeah, that was a disaster, no question. But so let's talk about the roster stuff. So the bulk of this show is meant to be a roster building exercise on how we see the roster today, after the season, before free agency, before the draft. There are a number of pieces. I kind of wrote them in a certain order. I went with offensive guys first and then defense. And the big decision, I think, in the offseason, not only for John Schneider, but the new coaching regime, is Geno Smith. Mm-hmm. Geno Smith has a $31,200,000 cap hit. If he's fully vested, fully paid, he's got a roster bonus coming up, plus a workout bonus, plus some other, guaranteed bonus by the end of the first day of the league in March, that gets him up to that $31 million cap hit for 2024. That's a big number. Now, I've seen arguments in favor of Geno in this situation. in that if you take a look at the advanced stats, he's somewhere in between the 12th and 15th best quarterback in the NFL, just statistically. And his cap hit is a reflection of that, falls into that 10 to 15 range as far as quarterbacks who are paid. And so you can make an argument that that's kind of where he is as far as value. But your argument is a little different from that. And we can talk about that. And whether or not it makes sense to have Geno back for a team that's, according to John Schneider, who he really likes Geno, sort of a ready-made roster, really close to winning, a couple tweaks here or there, gives the team some veteran presence and leadership that's going to be really important as they transition to a new scheme.
Well, I mean, you just said it. If you're win now, you're going to bring in a league average quarterback. How is that going to win big? Especially at 31 million, where you currently have like no cap space. If you can get him to drop one of those bonuses, so that way his cap number drops by 10 million and make it 21 million. Okay, that's more reasonable. But you're in win now mode with a win never. I don't want to say that, but with a quarterback that's, he can get you to the playoffs, but you're not winning there. That's not winning. And that to me isn't. If you're, and
we've talked about this before
with the coaching staff. If you're going to take a big swing on Ben Johnson, why are you playing it ultra safe?
Well, I think that you would still maybe draft a quarterback at 16 or trade up or whatever. That's fine. Geno's clearly a bridge quarterback, Keith. I'm not saying you build a franchise around him. I'm just saying that for especially like a guy like Dan Quinn, who has that culture, wants the roster, he's going to be successful right away. It's very important for him to be successful right away. It's very important for John Snyder to be successful. The best way to do that is to have a quarterback can at least get you to 10 wins, maybe 11 or 12 with the right roster. That's Geno Smith. I mean, he's not special. He's not your franchise guy. He's probably one of the premier bridge quarterbacks, though, in the NFL. And you're right. The cap hit at 31 doesn't make sense because you have other things to do with the roster. But if you can restructure that thing or extend and push money and drop that cap hit,
quarterback,
that makes sense to me.
If you're drafting a quarterback in the first round, you are expecting them to play. Now, they don't have to play week one. They don't have to play week one. In fact, the longer you can push it out for them so they aren't starting, the better. But ultimately, they're going to play in year one. And how many games? How many games is Geno Smith going to start before
the other
that
argument
transition happens?
The other argument for a new head coach like Ben Johnson, for example, or Slowick, is what they've done with their other quarterbacks that they've had under them. And if you could take a look at Drew Lock, or you take a look at Geno Smith under that situation too, you could get maybe more out of them. And so that is an argument in favor of Geno Smith, I think.
Especially if you're Ben Johnson, because you made Jared Goff, who was much worse than Geno Smith during his time with the Rams, into the equivalent or slightly better than Geno Smith in Detroit. So that's been a great transition there. So maybe that's the idea, is you bring in him and expect Geno to be better. He's not your long-term future. You need to get that long-term future on the roster. This is a draft with 6 first-round quarterbacks. And if Fields is in play, really 7 young franchise potential quarterbacks that are going to be around to do stuff with. And you have to take advantage of that situation for your Seattle. You got a 34-year-old league average guy, and you're not going anywhere with Geno. You have to take advantage of the opportunity that you have. and they got to go get one of them.
So, okay. So we're probably going to remain undecided about Geno, but we will continue to have that conversation, especially after we hire a coach, because then we're going to know, I think, much better at which direction I think that they want to go with this. Because if we hire a new coach, there's decisions that need to be made in February. I think February 18th is a kind of a deadline day for Geno to get like a $10 million bonus fully guaranteed on his contract. And he needs to be released or traded prior to that in order for them to avoid that. So, and we can talk about Drew Lock as part of our conversation when we get to unrestricted free agents. So, other players on the roster. This is kind of the core that we're talking about, really. Although I do have some practice squad level guys on here. Ken Walker, $2.3 million cap hit. Zach Charbonnet, Kenny McIntosh. Those are going to be the guys in the running back room under contract this year. We'll probably add a guy. They've got Bryant Koback on a futures contract as well. I don't know if there's any reason for us to talk about that. I think that's a good young room that's under cheap contracts right now. You just kind of leave that for this year anyway.
I mean, there's a possibility you could get DJ Dallas back at around a league minimum.
But would you want to, Keith?
Yeah, just for his kickoffs and stuff, and his knowledge of blocking schemes and blitz pickups and that kind of stuff. I mean, is he special? No. Does he do the job as a third or fourth running back? Yeah. I think he could do far worse.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see, because new coach and all. We'll find out if that's going to be important. Tight end. This is kind of an area where we're a little light. Will Disley's under contract, but it's a $10 million cap hit. That's not going to happen. So something's going to happen with Will Disley this year. He's either going to get cut and they'll see a bunch of savings against the cap, or they will sign him to an extension and they will restructure that thing so that his cap hit is closer to where he should be, $6-7 million a year. For me, that
yeah, 10 million is extreme, especially with this. I mean, again, new coaching staff. So we don't what are their opinions of him and the roster and his value as a blocker. But
right.
If you look at the opinions of the outgoing coaching staff, he was the third string tight end. He got the third most snaps.
Yeah.
I
think there was probably some disagreement there in between the offensive coordinator and the head coach. I think, if Pete had his way, Will Disley would have been much more involved, I think, in the offense.
Yeah, I'm just saying, just from within the coaching staff, he had dropped from being the guy with the most snaps to being the guy with the least snaps.
The weird thing that we have to keep in mind is this is John Snyder's team now. Like, this is his personnel. This is going to be his personnel and his players through and through. And so that'll be interesting to see how he values that. And if he hires offensive coordinators that are going to maximize the personnel that he chooses to have on his team.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and we don't know when the decision was made to re-sign Disley. Was that decision made because John Snyder said, "Hey, this is a good idea. We should do this," and Pete Carroll was like, "Yeah, sure," or was that Pete Carroll going, "We need this guy back. Pay him because we need our guy that can block."
Yeah,
right. We don't know.
And at the time when he signed that contract, both of us were like, "Whoa, that was like a 40 or 50% premium on a guy that we didn't have to pay." Like, nobody was going to break down the doors to get Will Disley in free agency. He's a good, solid player, but there's like 20 of those guys in the NFL.
Well,
so
if you're looking at his stats, there's like 20 of those guys. There's 50 of those guys stat wise. But when you look at the tape and some of the blocking and some of the stuff that he's trusted to do, like occasionally going one-on-one against some of the best pass rushers in the NFL, there's very few tight ends. that
but
are there.
Name those tight ends that are paid $10 million a year.
Yeah. That's the thing, is the blocking part of it it's a big part of it within, coaching circles and game planning and all of that. But they don't pay for it. Those guys aren't paid a premium to block.
So the other tight end on the roster in a futures deal is Tyler Mabry. He's been around for a while. He's got a $915,000 cap hit. So and then we'll talk about Noah Fant and some of the others because and Parkinson, because they are unrestricted at this point. And we've got a new regime coming in, so we just don't know. Wide receiver Tyler Lockett, $26.895 million cap hit in 2024. That is not going to happen. Love Tyler Lockett. Need Tyler Lockett back. Want him back. I think every coach in the NFL and any guy that's going to come in is going to want Tyler Lockett, at least in 2024. But you got to do something with the cap hit, which is probably a way that this team will generate cap space is to get his 2024 number down into the $10 million range probably, and push the money out and extend and so forth. So we'll see. You don't want to go too far with Tyler Lockett because he's getting older, but you need to make that number work this year.
Yeah.
And then DK Metcalf, 24.5, probably not going to touch that number if I had to guess today, but that is also a candidate to restructure and extend. Depending on the regime and so forth. But there would be no way that almost any coach in the NFL wouldn't want DK Metcalf on the roster. So,
yeah, the anything with DK Metcalf that happens is about extending him. And so, yeah, I mean, are you willing to go through the process to do that at this point with him? I don't know.
You could trade him too. I mean, he's a tradable asset. If you really wanted to get a quarterback on your team this year and you wanted to start that new quarterback, how valuable is DK Metcalf on your roster with a new quarterback like that? He's pretty valuable.
Extremely valuable.
But in order to get the quarterback on your roster, you might need the capital return from DK Metcalf's trade in order to move around in the draft to get the guy that you want. And so he's to me, he's an asset that would be highly coveted. I mean, you could probably get 2 first-round picks for DK Metcalf. That's something that John Schneider and a new regime may like to toy around with this offseason. I don't know.
Especially given JSN. Right? They drafted him.
And JSN's getting paid $3.2 million.
Yeah. And they drafted him 20th overall, started slow, but really made an impact late in the season. And will only get better. So,
yeah,
it's a possibility. I don't think it happens. I think that Metcalf is an attractive piece to any coach, any offensive coordinator, as you're hiring, and to hire someone and then yank that piece out from underneath them, I think would be a bad look. I don't think they're going to go there.
I do too. I agree. I think that's why I think DK Metcalf's back. I think he's probably even back at $24.5 million now, unless he gets an extension, and then they can push that number around a little bit. You mentioned Jackson Smith and Jigba, $3.2 million. That's going to be one of the best value contracts on the roster for the next 3 years, plus a 5th-year option. DK Dwayne Eskridge at 1.9. Now there's a guy you could cut. And I think maybe a likely cut off this roster before training camp. But then again, he's a young player. Maybe another regime and some injury luck for him could have a role for him and a pretty cheap number. So maybe you don't do anything with him. You invite him back, see where he's at in training camp. Derek Young, $1 million cap hit. He's going to be back. Jake Bobo, again, a value. At $918,000, and I think that he's going to have a role, at some point. Esep Winston's on there, Cody White, a couple of futures contracts. So let's talk about the offensive line, Keith. Oluwatimi, Bradford, Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, Forsyth, all under contract, all really inexpensive contracts. Charles Cross is the most expensive at $5.8 million, but you're not getting rid of your franchise left tackle. So everything else is just really easy and manageable. Anthony Bradford's 1.1, Abe Lucas is 1.4, Stone Forsythe 1.1 essentially. They may like to move on from Stone Forsythe just because he struggled, but
he did. He also, when he started, because of injuries, when he played better than when he came off the bench, so that might be something to think about. The other thing with him is that he's a guy that can play both sides. Maybe he's not great, but he's your swing tackle that you can have active as your third tackle on game days, and there's value in that. And at $1 million, right? That's just above the league minimum. That's
and we need to talk about Abe Lucas. And his knee.
Lucas,
it's like
he just had knee surgery.
Yeah. So I saw him with a hospital gown and cap with no caption, no official word out of the VMAC. So there's no official, he had surgery, but he had surgery. And so I'm hopeful because he had surgery, he had something to fix, and hopefully they fixed it. And that leads me to be more hopeful for Abe Lucas into the future. I think if he didn't have surgery and he just went along, I'd be more fearful of him having a very degenerative condition in his knee, and he still may, but at least he had something there that they could fix, and maybe that did fix it, and he'll be back as good as new by training camp. Otherwise, they may well have to expend high draft capital to get a starting offensive tackle out of the draft or free agency.
Yeah. I think they go into it with the end of this year with him as the starter. It also depends on, what's the outcome coming out from the surgery? Like, is he going to be ready for camp? If he's not ready for camp, they need to have a backup plan. And I think they will. But that's got to be part of it. What you didn't name with all of what you were just, when you went through the list of everyone, other than Forsythe, who's a backup?
We only have 5 offensive linemen right now under contract.
And 3 of them are tackles.
Bradford, Cross, Lucas, Forsythe. We'll talk about Lewis and some other guys I have on my unrestricted free agent list. But those are the guys that are under contract. That's it. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing to allow another regime and potentially offensive line coach and offensive coordinator and head coach kind of mold a offensive line into what they need. So it could be good. All right. So that's the offense. How about the defense, Keith? Let's start up front with the big boys.
If you start, you're looking at, there's a lot of guys under contract. Jerron Reed is on there. Dre Jones.
Yeah.
Reed.
Draymond Jones's cap hit is 18.1. I just want to talk about that just for a minute since you mentioned Dre Jones.
His dead money is at 13. You're only saving $5 million by letting him go. So he signed a 3-year deal, and he only played one. Now, a year from now,
you might be able to move some of that money around though to give us some cap space if we need it.
Yep, you can convert. He's got 11 million of, actual roster. You could convert 10 of it into bonus and give yourself $5 million of cap space right there.
Yeah,
it does add $5 million of dead money next year, but there's that. But that one's worth looking at because he underperformed, but at the same time, new coach, new scheme, new system.
Right.
Jerron Reed at 5.9, only 1.5 million in dead cap. So if the new scheme is like he's not a fit, he could be gone.
Sorry for that.
Mike Morris is on there at 1 million. A bunch of guys that are futures deals kind of guys. Brian Monet, $5.9 million with only 500 of dead money, and this guy hasn't played in a year and a half. He's as good as gone. Sorry, I like
agree.
Brian Monet, but there's no
I do too.
way.
Yeah, but not at that number. I mean, you cut Brian Monet, you save almost all of that, right? It's like almost it's all non-guaranteed, right?
Yeah, you cut him,
So
you let him go.
You cut him and you can hire him again. He can come back, but it's going to be at league minimum. I mean,
and it's
I don't even understand why he has this number, to be completely honest. Too. Yeah, he was a fine player, but he wasn't great. He's not like a 5.8 guy. No. I don't even know how he ended up with this cap number.
I think what it ended up being was, if you looked at the structure of the deal, there was a lot of money at the end of it. So that way it can be like, hey, look, Brian Monet just got a $10 million contract, but he was never going to see the $6 million that he's due in 2024. So it was really a 2-year, $4 million contract, not a 3-year, $10 million contract. Because that third year was just, it's on there so that the agent can say, hey, look, I got Brian Monet $10 million. Right.
I think the real conversation around our defensive tackles and defensive ends, and we haven't got to the defensive ends yet, but we will here in just a second, is scheme. Like, what are we going to run? What do we need? What personnel fits? You know, right now, honestly, our defensive tackle group seems to be more of a 4-3 defensive tackle group anyway. So I think the transition would be pretty easy to a scheme like Dan Quinn's, for example. And I'd be a little bit more concerned about some of our undersized defensive ends in a 4-3, but we can talk about that a little bit. We've got Uchenna Nwasu at 7.8. I think for him and his production when he's healthy is still a really good value. Boye Mafe's cheap at 2.3. Derek Hall and Mike Morris kind of rounded out 2.1 for Derek Hall, 9.9 for Mike Morris. A couple other guys on the practice squad level, Drake Thomas, Latrell Bumpus, and Levi Bell, all with really low cap numbers. So it's kind of a light group going forward. They're going to have to add to it.
Into this last year, we're always like, if you think about like the whole lead up to training camp, in training camp, we were like, they're going to add another piece. They're going to add another piece. They have to. There's just not enough bodies. And eventually they did with Leonard Williams, but by then there had been attrition, right? There'd already been guys that had gotten hurt. And to me, that was one of the big flaws of the defense, was they just didn't have the bodies to rotate up front. And they were one of the worst run defenses in the NFL because of it. So
yeah. And Cameron Young did come along and play, but I think he needed that year of seasoning. He needs a year in the weight room and to put on some solid NFL type weight. How about linebacker? Linebackers is awful. So we went into last year's offseason being awful at linebacker, Keith. Just completely void of any talent whatsoever, right? Except for Jordan Brooks. And then Jordan Brooks was hurt, right? We knew that in the offseason, and he wasn't going to be ready, in theory, by the first week. Ended up being, we were wrong on that. Good for him. But this year again, it's void. Like Nick Bellure and Patrick O'Connell are the only linebackers under contract. And Nick Bellure has a cap hit of $4 million, which is ridiculous. I mean, that's about the kind of money that you would pay Bobby Wagner.
Yeah, Nick Bellure didn't make a lot of sense with the old regime when it comes down to it. He was more a coach than a player, but he never really made a lot of sense with the amount that they were paying him to stick around. I can't imagine that his contract survives more than a couple of days with the new coaching staff, because that's just a pointless contract. I mean, he's a special teams captain and all that. I get that, but at $4 million for a guy that can't play on on the field as a linebacker.
Right.
So
Right. No, he's a special teams guy. He's a special teams captain. He's good at that. Is he? I guess he is. I don't really, there's nothing that forces me to pay attention to him on the field. Like, oh my God, did you see Nick Bellore? We can never let him go. Even at $4 million, he's a great value. He's the greatest special teams player ever. No.
I will say that.
Not.
So right now it's O'Connell is the only linebacker on the roster.
Right.
I will say that depending on the scheme, right?
Yes. Sure.
Boye Mafe, Chenanu Wasu, Derek Hall, all count as linebackers.
Correct. Ish. Yeah, it gets a little squishy. Defensive end. Yeah.
I mean, it does get a little squishy, but I'm just thinking about like Boye Mafe. He, in his responsibilities this last year, involved setting an edge against the run. It involved coverage responsibilities. It involved, So
would you play him
passer at times? Like there's.
How would he fit then in a 4-3? I mean, would he be your strong side guy, or would he be a weak side guy?
I would probably put him at strong, because he can come up and put his hand on the ground and do defensive end stuff. We know he can do that.
Yes.
And it gives him more opportunities to get after the quarterback, which is one of his like great skill sets, than on the weak side. So I'd put him. That's where I'd put him.
Would you leave Nuasu on the roster? Because he'd be in basically the same spot.
If you're running a 4-3, I would leave Nuasu on the roster, and I'd stick him on the other side of the line at defensive end.
What would you do with Draymond Jones?
Draymond Jones would be
three-tech
defensive end right in front of Boye Mafe, so they'd be next to each other.
Yeah.
So I look at this and I'm thinking from Dan Quinn perspective and what he did when he was with Seattle, and then what he's evolved to there. He really almost plays with 5 defensive linemen, which is kind of what Seattle was trying to do by going to the 3-4. It's just the alignment and everything is different, and the way that Dan Quinn does it, and so to have your line and bookended by Mafe and Nuasu, and having 3 penetrating defensive linemen in between them.
Yeah, like Draymond Jones, Jerron Reed, Cameron Young, right?
Guys that Cameron Young isn't a penetrator; he's a
Derek Hall.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you got guys that can get after the quarterback, and so I think that works well. Derek Hall ends up being a guy that okay, where do you stick him? Can he cover well enough to be a weak side linebacker? I don't know. Can he? Maybe becomes a situational pass rusher and that kind of thing, a rotational guy. Wow, you spent a really big draft pick if you're John Snyder on a situational pass rusher. I don't know. We'll see how he develops. I mean, think about the jump that Boye Mafe made between year 1 and year 2.
Agreed. So beyond linebacker is the safety group. This is the group where you could spend a lot of time talking about it, because you're going to have to do some stuff contractually. You're going to have to do some stuff to fill voids then, talent-wise and so forth. So right now we've got Quandre Diggs at $21.2 million cap hit. We've got Jamal Adams at $26.9 million cap hit. So let's just talk about those two for now, because for me, I think both of them need to go. And the savings, and one of them would be designated June 1st. So
and it's gonna be Jamal Adams that gets designated, because his dead money is sitting at $20 million. Whereas
so you can split that.
I mean, what?
You can split that over 2024 and 2025 if you designate him.
And with Quandre Diggs, that his dead money is only $10 million. So if you cut Quandre Diggs, you get $11 million in cap relief. And you can do stuff with that, right? And if you were to just blatantly cut Jamal Adams, you get $6 million worth of cap relief. It's a huge chunk of dead money. You're not really replacing any production, so I can see them doing it anyways. But if you designate him to June 1st, then what you do is you double, right? You add 10 million to that. So now you're generating $16 million in cap space by spreading the cap hit over 2 years. And I think that is the play here.
Yes.
Because you gain
because Pete Carroll's no longer involved.
11 million
So
by cutting Diggs. You gain 16 by cutting Adams with the designation, right? You've just generated $27 million of cap space by cutting one guy that barely played, and when he did, he was awful, and another guy that was a major problem most of the year. Now that leaves you with Jarek Reed as your only safety.
Well, Julian Love is under contract, $8 million cap hit, but he's going to be your down safety.
I don't have him on the roster.
Yeah,
did I miss that?
You did. That's okay. So Julian Love's there, Kobe Bryant, Jarek Reed. You know, if a new coaching regime comes in and agrees with Pete Carroll's regime, said that Kobe Bryant's a safety, we've got potentially 3 safeties on the roster. At least Kobe Bryant's going to be hybrid. He can play slot safety for you, etc. Jarek Reed
cornerback,
as well.
Though, things are much better.
And we also have Ty Okada and Jonathan Sutherland, who we both liked in preseason last year, back in futures contracts as well.
So at cornerback, you're talking about Devin Witherspoon at 7.2. That's a bargain. Trey Brown at 1.2. That's a bargain.
Mm-hmm.
Kobe Bryant at 1.1. That's probably about right. Tariq Woolen at 1.0. That's a bargain.
That's a bargain.
Right.
Yes.
So you've got guys.
Yeah. We've got 3 or 4 guys.
You got to fill out,
5.
Some depth there.
Right.
But you've got guys.
Yeah. So when you take a look at the whole, we're really going to have to make some decisions at safety and linebacker, similar to what we had to make last year. And everything else is pretty decent, as far as a core to build around. We can kind of, for me, move through a little bit of the free agents now. And the first one that I've got come up to talk about is Leonard Williams. Mm-hmm. The new staff is going to, and John Schneider are going to have to make a decision. They gave up a 2nd-round pick for this guy. Do they let him walk after 10 games, 10-game rental? That's expensive. Or do they I think they do try to sign him. But he's a free agent. He can go anywhere. He signed a 3-year, $63 million deal with New York in 2021, played his last year of that this year. Pro Football Focus projects his new contract to be 3 years, $51 million, 17 APY, so with $37 million guaranteed.
That's the same contract that the Seahawks gave Dre Jones.
Yeah. Right.
He's also 30, where Jones was like 26. So that
is a big difference.
Yep.
But Leonard Williams was one of your best players on defense last year.
Yep.
So I would be fine with the 3-year contract for Leonard Williams to come back.
Yeah.
But we need to find the money to do that, which we can't. Last show, we both agreed that we could come up with a minimum of $40 million if we needed to, and as much as $60 million without restructuring anything. That's not without, talking about Tyler Lockett's contract or any of the other contracts we could kind of manipulate.
So
I think we can generate whatever we need to generate.
The difference between 40 and 60 was Geno Smith.
Yes. So I think Leonard Williams definitely in play. I would definitely want him back.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the other guys. Darrell Taylor.
He's a restricted free agent, so
He also is a better 4-3 scheme fit.
yeah, he we'll see. I mean that's going to be.
You have him as restricted. I've got him as unrestricted.
He's a restricted free agent. He should have been an unrestricted free agent, but because he never was active his rookie year because of the leg injury, that year didn't accrue for him. So the contract rolled over to another year, but he didn't get counted for a year of service. So he's actually a restricted free agent.
Okay. That makes it easy. I would bring him back just in camp and see what he can do.
Yeah.
Mario Edwards. Go ahead.
Mario Edwards, 30-year-old. I mean, he was a good run defender. That's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no advantage to these guys. That's the hard part about this list is like if it was Pete Carroll's team again, we'd kind of know what to expect and it'd be easy to kind of do this. We don't even know who's going to be the coach, what the scheme's going to be. We don't know if these guys are going to be attractive. These guys are almost just like any other. You might have a slight advantage because you have, John Schneider has a relationship with their, not promoters. What am I trying to say? Agents, they, and so forth. And these players. So there might be a little bit of that, but there's no advantage really of Mario Edwards coming or going. It's like, it may or may not happen.
So let's go down this list pretty quick because there's very few people that I think we need to spend a lot of time with, right? I'm going to skip Bobby Wagner. That's a different discussion. Okay. Phil Haynes, I think you let go.
Yes.
Drew Lock, you bring back only if you let Gino go. So he becomes your bridge quarterback. Devin Bush can go. He underperformed. Evan Brown, you might bring back, but you're bringing him back as a backup because it's Oluwatimi's job now. Damian Lewis, that's going to be an interesting decision because
agreed.
He's good when he's healthy, but he's not healthy much. Maybe you go in a different direction there. Jason Peters, you let go. Artie Burns can go.
Would you let me pause really quick and ask you about maybe a contract for Damian Lewis? What would you be willing to pay a starting offensive guard in the NFL, Damian Lewis,
who's only 27? I don't know. I'm looking at. Yes, he was a starting guard. He was pretty good as a starting guard. He has never reproduced the quality that he had as a rookie.
And he was played on the right side.
Okay, so we move him back over and see if he can do that, but he still has to stay healthy.
Would you pay him $10 million a year to stay?
Oh, God, no. I wouldn't. Because he's replaceable at that. He's not good. He is not a $10 million a year guard. He's not that good. He's a $5 million a year guard.
There's not very many starters in the NFL that are being paid $5 million, Keith.
I mean, Phil Haynes made $4 million last year, and he was brought back to be the starter.
Yeah, but he's twice as good as Phil Haynes. He's just not been as healthy. I think if
he's not been as healthy, and he also
hasn't been.
He also has had some struggles.
Okay, so let's keep moving through your list.
Right. Jake Curran is unrestricted. If league minimum, if you think you can do stumping with him, and that's kind of the end, right? I said Artie Burns.
Well, I had Artie Burns, DJ Dallas, which we previously talked about. Jason Peters, Colby Parkinson. There's a conversation for you.
So, like I said, I was rolling through the ones that I'm like, these guys are gone.
Okay.
Now, then there's guys that need talked about. We already talked about Leonard Williams. The next one would be Bobby Wagner. I think Pete being gone, I think Bobby retires. I think Bobby came back.
Bobby said he'd come back. Bobby said he wanted to play in 2024 already. He also
talked about how emotional it was because this might be his last game.
So Pro Football, let me ask you this. Pro Football Focus has a projected contract for Bobby Wagner at 1 year, $4 million, fully guaranteed. That seems like a bargain to me.
Oh, I'd do that. Yeah, absolutely. Do that. Bring him back. just for what he does in your locker room and how much help he'll give a new
Totally.
coaching staff. Yeah, that would be great.
How about Jordan Brooks, Keith?
So Jordan Brooks, 27. This is a guy who's been struggling with injury, but he's been really good. And I mean, like when he got hurt and had to go out and Devin Bush came in, there was a noticeable decrease in the quality of the defense and their ability to stop the run and just the physicality overall. Like, there was a noticeable change when Jordan Brooks went out. Now, I've seen a projection for him at $13 million a year. That's going to be hard to justify for a middle linebacker, especially, depending on the scheme, right? There are certain schemes where you're like, oh, we got to have a guy like that. And he's ready made. He's here. Just do it. But at $13 million a year in other schemes, like that's going to be hard, but it's also a talent that's going to disappear on you. So, and he's been surprisingly durable until he got hurt right at the very end of the 2022
ACL.
season.
But he also came back from that ACL.
Yeah, he came back from it incredibly quickly to get on the field at the beginning of 2023.
Would you give him a 1-year prove it deal, or would you give him like a 2-year kind of a maybe 10 million a year?
I would probably do the 2-year 10 million because I don't think he will take a prove it deal. I think someone else is going to give him a contract,
a 4-year contract.
Yeah. Someone's going to look at his tape and they're like, you know what? He needed more time to get healthy. He rushed back. That's why he got hurt again. You get him fully healthy, you get him out there, and he's a difference maker.
I agree.
So if it takes a 2-year deal, I would do it. It depends. Like if he's healthy, if the doctors are telling you, no, just he's going to be back. Like I would give him a 3-year deal. That 13 million number scares me because that's a lot for a linebacker. That doesn't rush the passer.
One of the players that you brushed over quickly, I want to talk about briefly before we get on to a couple of the other players to finish out this conversation. Drew Lock. Say John agrees with me, goes for the big swing, gets a Ben Johnson in. Does Drew Lock become, or a Slowick, does Drew Lock become attractive to a coach like that? Because he's got the tools, he's toolsy, to be able to help mold and turn Drew Lock into a capable starter in the NFL. Yeah.
I mean, Ben Johnson did it to a guy like Goff, right? You could pull a similar thing with Drew Lock. So it's possible. I don't know. It's a big risk if you're like, no, he's my guy. We're gonna cut Geno. We're gonna promote Lock. We're not gonna go draft a first rounder because we've got our starter. Any coach that says that shouldn't be hired.
Well, let me ask. Hold on, Keith. Wait. I believe it was you. Maybe it was another guy named Keith Myers who said that we should not have Geno Smith back because Drew Lock was just as capable, proved so in a game, and Drew Lock should be handed the keys because he can be a lot cheaper than Geno, and we can do a lot more with the roster.
But that was because we're going to have a bridge. We're going to draft a first-round quarterback, and Drew Lock's going to be our bridge for 6 games.
Yeah.
And I can pay Drew Lock $5 million to be a bridge for 6 games rather than paying Geno Smith $30 million to be a bridge for 6 games.
I could easily see Drew Lock being a quarterback that would take a similar contract that Geno Smith signed.
Oh, and he wouldn't. No one's going to give him that because Geno Smith signed that contract because he came in and started for Seattle and succeeded. So he got a contract. Drew Lock has come in and been a backup, an effective backup.
But I could see Drew Lock being paid a $3.5 million base with a $3.5 million incentive.
Oh, so you're talking about the contract that Geno signed before the current one?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's Or a $4 million with $4 million in incentives, something like in that range. I think
Right,
that's
right.
appropriate for a guy like Locke, to be your bridge. And if you
Okay.
do that, then Gino's gone.
Okay. So let's talk about the two tight ends, Colby Parkinson and Noah Fant.
Mm-hmm.
So Parkinson came in, played a lot of snaps this year, but didn't have a huge amount of production. I thought they used him better in the red zone this year, but I think he's got a lot of potential. He just, I don't know. He didn't show up in Shane Waldron's offense.
It depends on the scheme. It really does. With both those guys. I mean, Noah
I can
Fant
also see Pat Parkinson moving on somewhere and catching like 45 balls for and 7 touchdowns.
And like 6 or 7 touchdowns. Yeah.
Yeah.
It depends on the scheme. It depends on what the staff wants to do. Parkinson's a guy that he's got.
What if it's Ben Johnson,
He's,
Keith? And who was the guy in Detroit, the tight end that was a rookie this year that had like 89 catches for 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns or something like that?
But Colby Parkinson doesn't have that athleticism.
He's pretty athletic, pretty fast for a tight end.
He's big.
At 6'8".
He's 6'7" or 6'8" or whatever. He's tall, but he doesn't move that well in terms of his ability to create space and get open.
Noah Fant moves well.
Noah Fant moves significantly better.
Yes.
He's also a slightly better blocker. He's also only 27. Right?
Who? Noah Fant
Colby
or
Parkinson's
Colby
only 25, but Noah Fant's 27.
I didn't realize Noah Fant was still so young, but he just finished his rookie contract. 5th-year option.
So he's a guy that what's his market?
So projected contract is 3 years, $27 million, $9 million APY. That's lower than Will Disley is right now.
Yeah, I'd take Noah Fant over Will Disley at that number. Hell yeah.
Yeah. And
you can do a lot more with Noah Fant. He's not the blocker.
And get a blocking tight end in the 5th round. Call it good.
Noah Fant isn't the blocker that Will Disley is, but his upside as far as production goes is like much. He's
criminally underused. I mean, he was only targeted less than 1 time in 6 games this year.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me. I don't know. I don't know what was going on there. Okay. So that's our unrestricted list. And John Radigan is I've got as a restricted guy, exclusive rights, Miles Adams, Brady Russell, a tight end, Raquan O'Neal, who was on the roster for a while, McClendon Curtis, again, 2 guys we picked up midseason off practice squads, ended up hanging on the roster but never really played. And then outside linebacker Josh Uwenjogu.
Good job with that. I would not have. I wouldn't have even tried.
Uno Jiaogu, something like that, is on there. And so really, the new regime is going to inherit a decent roster with a lot of core players.
You missed one restricted free agent that I intentionally skipped when I did my roll through because I wanted to get your thoughts. Michael Jackson.
Yeah, he's on my list. Why didn't I talk about him?
Because he has performed well for the last 2 years. Didn't get as much run this year because the team drafted Witherspoon and, tried to get Trey Brown out there more, and Brown played well. So he was kind of just lost in that shuffle. But when he came in, he played pretty well. He was the guy that, when they benched Woolen, it was Jackson that came in, and the defense looked really good with him in there.
He's got the ability to play inside, outside, take on other teams' number 1 wide receivers, that sort of thing.
He's a big guy. He's got that Pete Carroll size, length,
6'2",
physicality, tackles really well. But what do you do with a guy like that with a new scheme? It doesn't know.
Well, I mean, I think you fit, especially if you're going to play man. He's I think he can do that. I think he can do that for you. I like him as your 5th cornerback. We talked about Kobe Bryant, Trey Brown, Witherspoon, Woolen. Michael Jackson could be that 5th piece for you.
you
because
give me
he
those
can play
names, he's your
multiple
fourth
positions.
piece. I'd put him on the field before I'd put Kobe Bryant right now.
Agreed. Kobe, I feel bad for the kid, Kobe Bryant, because he's been switched around so many times, asked to do so many things. I don't know that he's ever had a chance to really sink in and get used to a spot. He was a good corner in college, and something's happened. He was an outside guy, and won the award for the best corner in college football.
Well, the difference is he didn't have the speed and athleticism that some of the other guys have. He made up for it with good technique in college, but now that the speed and athleticism of the receivers has taken a massive jump forward, he's struggling. And that's what we're seeing. He was a great college player, that it isn't quite translating for him.
At Cincinnati, so their schedule is a little wonkish there too. So.
And the other thing that you have with that is that you're looking at him being moved around, right? So he had to learn a new position. He had to play free safety for the first time.
Yeah.
He didn't do it well.
A year after, he had to learn how to play the slot.
That he'd never done. Yeah, because he'd always been an outside guy.
Right.
The techniques, and people were like, oh, it's cornerback. Now, the technique's very different as an inside guy than as an outside guy.
I will say this, if he ever does pull it together, that experience is going to really serve him well someday. And I just hope it all kind of comes together for him.
I mean, as a slot guy, basically he's a hybrid, right? He's a slot safety. And there's value in that if the team uses him right and he can adapt to that role. And I think using him as a slot safety is the right role for him. Mm-hmm. He's just got to make that jump and get to a point where he can do it.
Yeah, I think if you run a too high scheme, he can be your second deep free safety.
Yeah.
So
all right,
after doing this exercise, Keith.
Let's wrap this up fairly quick. I need to go get a Seahawk tattoo, and that's going to happen this morning. So,
nice. Well, I was just going to ask you a simple question. After looking at and doing this exercise, do you feel as good about this roster as before we started?
Yeah, I do.
And knowing that we can generate some money.
You can generate a lot of money. But the problem that I look at is between safety and linebacker. That's a lot of holes. You have one real safety on the roster, and you have, depending on the scheme, either one or three linebackers on the roster, or four, I guess.
We have talked about this ad nauseum, though, about the role that safety, at least in Pete's scheme, Clint Hurt, where we were spending way too much money on safeties, and we could replace those guys pretty easily. So I'm going to say, okay, now we need to put that to test. We need to replace what we've got pretty easily. We need to do it with much less money and through the draft.
They're so expensive for so little production out of both those guys. It's time for them to find a new home.
And I'm encouraged by Julian Love's play down the stretch.
Yeah,
if he was paired with a really good free safety, a really good deep free safety, we'd be in good shape. So part of the bigger money that we're going to spend, I'm going to say $10 million. If we get a $10 million free safety to come in free agency, that was really, really decent. That would really be a big step towards me being confident in this defense.
Yeah, Quandre Diggs 2 years ago.
Yes.
When he was
three.
Yeah, he was an $8 million safety who was hungry and played really well. Now he's an 18 to 20. Actually, this next year he's going to be a $20 million safety who played like crap.
But said he played well.
What?
But he said he played well.
Yeah, he said he played well.
He went on social media and he was like, I'm all that. Anyway, go get your tattoo.
Dude. What?
Fun. What are you getting?
I'm getting a Seahawk. Now,
nice.
I haven't seen it. I have an artist that's rendering it up, and she's the one doing the tattoo.
You have not seen it. You're just going to show up.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice.
The person doing my tattoo has done all my other tattoos. She knows. Okay. She knows her thing.
Well, go get a shot of whiskey and go get it done. That's kind of painful, right? I've not had one.
I've had 5. And yeah, the answer is yes, it's painful, but it's fun. But I do need a run. So.
All right. So you can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast, and you can find it on your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube. Hit the subscribe button. We'll talk to you later. Bye. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.